Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. In today's session, we'll take a closer look at some of the latest developments in the data loss prevention, or what we call in short as DLP solution within Microsoft Purview. So, as many of you would know, Purview is a comprehensive solution that brings together data security, data governance, and data compliance into a unified platform. So, thereby helping organizations protect and manage their data across the entire digital landscape. So, data security is one of the core foundational pillars of Purview, as you can see on the screen. So, and within data security, today we'll focus specifically on what's new and evolving in DLP. Before we start, just a quick refresher slide to summarize Purview DLP's value proposition. So, with DLP policies in Purview, you can monitor and prevent exfiltration of your sensitive data spanning across your digital estate, which essentially covers your M365 services like Teams, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. It covers your Office applications, your endpoint devices, both Windows and Mac OS, and your non-Microsoft Cloud apps, your on-prem repositories, and many more, as you can see the list here. I'll now walk you through a bunch of features that have been already released in this space. So they are either generally available to all or they are in preview, and also some of our key upcoming capabilities that have been announced. So kicking off with Endpoint DLP first, and in that starting with the Mac OS features. So a lot of capabilities that are supported on Windows devices today are coming up on Mac. So the idea is to provide complete security coverage to organizations that have Mac users as well, right? So on your screen right now is just a subset of it. So these have been recently released. Some are in preview, some are already generally available. So I'll quickly walk through these. So yeah, so we have OCR support on macOS. So OCR, as you know, is optical character recognition. So similar to what we have on Windows today, you would now be able to leverage OCR capability for your content on Mac endpoints to detect sensitive content in your images and apply appropriate policy to prevent exfiltration there. Also, as part of it, OCR cost estimator support will be there. So before actually enabling OCR at your tenant level, you can first estimate the expected charges or cost you would incur once you enable OCR in your tenant. So the OCR cost estimator is available, like for Windows, it's available for in the beginning for 30 days without any cost after once you activate it. So similar experience will also be available on macOS. Next, we have paste sensitive content from endpoint to browser. So this support is also being extended on macOS devices. We also have full file evidence support. So this feature can be used to save a copy of the entire file that matched the DLP policy to either a Microsoft managed storage or a customer managed storage. We also have the network share coverage extending to Mac. So with this, you can include or exclude specific network paths in the scope of your endpoint DLP policy. Then about the generation of file read events in Activity Explorer. So what it means is when a user opens a file without necessarily editing it or let's say copying any content from it, this activity will now be logged in the Activity Explorer at par with what already happens on Windows devices. So given that you have already turned on the always audit the activity on in your tenant's endpoint DLP settings. And lastly, to point out is that we have the just-in-time or JIT protection for egress to removable media and network shares. These scenarios are also extended to macOS now, and this feature is already generally available. Moving on, the OCR support for embedded images on endpoint. So this release would extend the OCR support from what today we already have for standalone images, which are your JPG, PNG, BMP, TIFF, and PDF images. The coverages will be extended to images that are embedded inside of the files. So the covered files here would be your Office files, your container files such as zip, rar, 7z, etc., and your PDF files. So this will also extend the coverage to so image-only PDF files are already supported, right? But with this release, the support will also be extended to hybrid PDFs. So these are the PDF files that contain both images as well as searchable text. So scanning for these embedded images in these files is already supported in Exchange Online today. And with this release, which is slated later this year, it will cover it on Endpoint as well. Moving on, we have Mac device management support for other MDM solutions. So Endpoint DLP is extending support to your macOS devices that are being managed by other third-party device management solutions other than the currently supported Intune and JAMF. So, which basically means that deploying Endpoint DLP across macOS devices would no longer require these devices to be managed only by these two MDM solutions. So in short, it is becoming MDM agnostic now, right? So Endpoint DLP can be enabled on a macOS device as long as user successfully logs into a Microsoft application through an Entra ID account, or in case the Microsoft applications are not being used or they are not signed into, then it would work through the Microsoft Enterprise SSO plugin for Apple devices. Now, why either of this is required is because Endpoint DLP is dependent on resolving the UPN or the user principal name, since the policies are scoped to users, right? Moving on to the next feature, we have to protect shadow files for OneDrive for Business, right? So I'll explain this. So let's say an employee frequently accesses corporate documents stored in OneDrive and uses the OneDrive sync client on the endpoint. So initially, this file would show up in the file explorer on their device under OneDrive, just like any regular file. But this file is actually not locally synced on the endpoint device yet until it is opened or let's say explicitly synced. So such files we call as shadow files or placeholder files or stub files. So it could potentially be exfiltrated, right, from here by let's say uploading to a service domain or copying to USB drive, etc. Because the endpoint DLP controls do not extend to this file as of now. So it is a blind spot in data protection. And but with this upcoming feature, Purview will extend the coverage to monitor shadow file egress starting with OneDrive. Now, just to make a point here that this feature has a dependency on just-in-time functionality. So therefore, enabling JIT in your tenant will be a prerequisite here. And just to add some more clarity around this, towards the right bottom of your screen, you can see an image. So these are the two icons that you would often see in File Explorer on Windows under status for each of the listed files that you have. The status would show the OneDrive cloud icon for your shadow files, while an encircled tickmark icon for the locally synced files. So with shadow file, when you register an interaction, let's say you try to copy to USB, so it would be blocked earlier. It would not be blocked earlier, right? But a second attempt to do so would be blocked because the file now gets synced after you made your first interaction with it, right? And it now comes under the scope of the endpoint DLP policy. But with this enhancement that we're bringing, the first attempt itself will be blocked when the file is actually not synced. So this is the core idea of this feature. Going on to the next one, we have allow and off modes for each action type and overall enforcement in the endpoint DLP. So as you would know, endpoint DLP has so far supported audit only, block and block with override modes. Now this feature adds off and allow to that list. So off, what it means is endpoint DLP will not fire any event or alert and will also not trigger any toast notification. So admins can use this enforcement mode to have custom restrictions for specific groups. On the other hand, allow mode would mean that endpoint DLP will not fire any alert and will not trigger any toast notification as well, but it will fire event in the activity explorer. So this is the behavior of these two modes, but what's the real use? So the use is that these modes will help in having more granular level setting for different scenarios. Like you can configure exceptions with these. So let's say you want to keep overall enforcement for upload to restricted cloud service domain as off, but you want to block specifically for, let's say, upload of sensitive content to Gmail, right? So this is where you would use off functionality in the overall enforcement and configure Gmail as a sensitive service domain group within it and set it at block mode, as you can see in the image here. This is how these two modes would work. Moving on, We have enhanced file type coverage for content scanning on Windows devices. The list of file types that Endpoint DLP on Windows devices can scan today for content classification and protection is being expanded to cover over 100 file types now. So this release makes the coverage of these file types on Endpoint consistent with what we have on other workloads like Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So it will reduce policy mismatches across workloads and help ensure a uniform enforcement. So I've shared here a list of the supported file types for content scanning. So this is already updated on our MS Learn documentation in the relevant section under Endpoint DLP. So you can check it out there. Just to highlight some of the file types. So we have source code files here like .cpp, .java, and .php covered now. This will help prevent exfiltration of the highly confidential data, which is your proprietary source code. We also have .csv and .tsv files covered that handle structured business data, such as it can be your employee records or your financial data and so on. Also, we have blanket protection for unscannable file types, right? So as I mentioned earlier, Purview Endpoint DLP supports a set of specific file types, but for other file types or extensions, customers can use the file extension is or file type is rule condition, right? They can use it today. But however, this approach can be challenging because it requires you to manually enumerate all the desired file extensions. Now, what about the file types that customer does not even know about? So there would be plenty of these, of course. Also, with new file types continually being created, it's not practically feasible for any DLP solution to individually support each file type, right? So with this feature, you can enable protection for files outside the standard endpoint DLP monitoring scope, which essentially means extending coverage to any file type out there. Now, this feature will help customers put a blanket protection for all unscannable file types. So you can configure the type of restrictions you want to enforce on these unsupported file types in your endpoint DLP policy. And there are three options basically that you can choose. You can extend it to all the unsupported file extensions, or you can configure like all unsupported file extensions with some exceptions that you can define, or extend it to a specific list of unsupported file extensions that you manually provide in the settings. As you can see on the screen on your right is the global endpoint DLP settings page where you can configure the unsupported file extension exclusions. You can also configure here the file extension groups, which you can then use in your DLP policy as you can see in the image on the left. So just to be clear, the capability on the left lets you apply restrictions only to unsupported file extensions. It, but these restrictions today that are supported are the four core restrictions, which are upload to restricted cloud service domain, your copy to removable USB devices, then your copy to any network share or print. Right. So these are the four actions that are covered, using which you can extend the restrictions to only the unsupported file extensions. Moving on, we have pause and resume support for USB network share and printer scenarios. So how this is different is currently for end users blocked by a block with override policy, when they copy a file to USB or network share, or when they print, they have to repeat the action again after providing business justification and clicking allow to override the block. So this is not the best user experience because user has to reinitiate the same action for the intended result. So, but with this new feature, Endpoint DLP will automatically resume the activity after the end user clicks allow to override the policy block, right? So this will ensure a smooth experience to the end user. Moving on, we have device and device group-based policy scoping in Endpoint DLP. As you would know, so far you could create a Purview Endpoint DLP policy and scope it to a specific set of users or user groups. This feature will allow you to create policies scope to both users as well as devices. So scope can be defined to include specific or all users or user groups and specific or all devices or device groups. So just for the information, device groups are created in Entra portal and this can be leveraged in the DLP policy. Also, I would briefly touch upon here the significance of supporting both individual devices as well as device groups. So let's say you want to scope a policy to device group, but want to exclude a specific device from that group, right? So to achieve this, admin need not go to the Entra portal, right? They will not have to deal with the IT department every time they want to change a device group membership. This can now directly be achieved from the Purview portal by using the exclusion feature of the device from the device group. Now, briefly talking about different scenarios this feature would help you uncover. So you can have different policies on different platforms, example Windows and Mac, or let's say if there's any performance issue on one platform, let's say Mac, admin should be able to disable the policy for a device group containing all Mac devices, right? While keeping it active on the Windows devices. So earlier, if this issue would occur, you would have to disable policy for all platforms or go ahead and offboard all Mac devices, which is not desirable. Also, you can have different policies for different devices based on the device risk level. Then you can have a pilot group of devices to test out your new policies. You can also have an option to enable policies to tailor protections to certain devices. Let's say the devices used by your vendors or contractors, or devices that are based in the same physical office. Lastly, you let's say you want to achieve different policies for the same user on different devices. So all these scenarios can now be covered with this feature. So as you can see also in the image on your right, so you can scope to both users and devices. For instance, you can scope the policy to 10 specific users and to all devices. So this way you can configure block of, let's say, copy to USB by these 10 users on any device that's onboarded. Or you can choose specific devices as well. So all these combinations are now possible with this. Moving on, we have a separate rule added for downloading the original file evidence on endpoint. So Purview has introduced this separate rule for downloading the original evidence now on your endpoint devices. So it is applicable for both customer managed and Microsoft managed storage when you try to download the evidence either using Purview or Defender portal. So with this feature, the preview and the download roles are decoupled with separate RBAC roles for both, right? So why this is important is customers would want to restrict the download role to a select few people, let's say, to prevent malicious use of sensitive data that is collected as evidence, while they may want to extend the preview permission to a larger group because it is relatively safer and secure. This capability is now there in the product. Then we have full file evidence support extended to the restricted apps or app groups now. Full file evidence already supports activities that is your upload to restricted cloud service domain or your paste to supported browser, copy to USB, network share, or Bluetooth apps. These were already there. Now it's been expanded to the unallowed app scenario as well. So you can define for what restricted apps or app groups you want to set evidence collection capability directly from the endpoint DLP settings. As you can see in the image how this works. So you can set the evidence collection as true at the restricted app group level individually, or you can also do this for individual restricted apps as well in the settings. Moving on. So there's a new feature wherein you can configure sensitive service domain groups and network share groups based on IP address or IP address range. So far what we supported is the file path to network share to be added for scoping, right? And there was URL based scoping for sensitive service domains defined within the sensitive service domain groups. Now, additional match types of IP address and IP address range have been introduced. So with this functionality, admins can now configure specific IP addresses or IP ranges in the DLP settings within network share groups and the sensitive service domain groups, which can then be used inside their DLP policies. Now, by enabling monitoring based on IP address or IP address ranges, what you can configure is you can configure policies to detect and block data movement to any network destination that is outside your approved corporate environment. Also, there can be scenarios when data movement is to be restricted within the org itself. Example, an organization would want to set precise policies ensuring that sensitive EU or European Union customer data cannot be transferred to a non-EU network destination, even within its internal systems. This is to ensure basically the compliance with GDPR. This feature can help you achieve that. So below, in the below image, you can see how this would look like. This is for the sensitive service domain group scenario. Similar would be for network share groups as well. Next, we have the hyperlink support in WAN and block toast messages. So with this feature, admins can now embed hyperlinks within the toast messages for specific rules. When this rule is triggered, the end user will see a toast with a customized title and message with a hyperlink. This feature is essentially useful when organizations need to direct their users to, let's say, a specific resource or a repository for more specific instructions. That is, let's say, an internal SharePoint site they want the users to go to. Also consider the case that these instructions may be different for employees in different verticals, say marketing, HR, or finance. So configuring different policies just to have a different toast message for different users is not a practically feasible approach. What would make rather more sense is to keep a single uniform policy and add hyperlink in the toast to the relevant internal resource where you can maintain all the different sort of instructions or message for employees from different departments. So this is a great use case that can be covered with this feature. Also, it will help organizations reduce the help desk load by avoiding frequent pings to IT support, which the users would make when they do not understand the warning message and when they want more details around the warning message. This is another important use case for this. Moving on, we have the full path of target domain now visible in the endpoint DLP. So the objective here is to, instead of showing just the domain name in Activity Explorer events, you show the full path of the domain. So with only the domain name, DLP analysts are sometimes not able to figure out to which specific domain page was the upload or data egress made to. However, this is provided as an option to customers today to choose between whether they want full URL or the domain name alone. Now, this is done keeping in mind that some customers may not want full URL to be displayed in events for various privacy security reasons, like maybe the full URL may include sensitive data like your auth token. So you would only want, let's say, only the domain name to be shown in the event. So we give this control to the customer, to the admins to choose in the form of a toggle available in your DLP settings, as you can see in the image below. Moving on, Edge for business to enforce printer, network share, and USB group restrictions. The aim of this feature is to ensure that Edge respects the endpoint DLP controls that you have defined for your printer groups, removable USB device groups, and your network share groups when these files are opened in Edge browser. Right? So let's say a user opens a PDF on device and tries to print it. So your endpoint DLP policy can block this if it is configured to do so, right? But if the PDF is opened from Edge browser and print action is performed from the browser, this new capability will ensure that the restriction is enforced there as well. This will essentially prevent users from bypassing the endpoint DLP protections by using Edge. Okay, so far we had the endpoint DLP features. Now moving on, we have collection policies. So historically, Purview has been designed to discover and classify data by default using all the sensitive information types or SITs and all the user activities across the connected data sources. So this approach is good. It enables us to provide insights into the top data risks in your organization before the policies are even created, right? But now what we are introducing is a more flexible approach to this default configuration for different data sources, which includes your devices, network, and browser. The idea here is to tailor the discovery of data and activities from these data sources based on what is relevant to you, right? So what core benefits of this would be, it will obviously reduce noise from SITs or user activities that are not relevant in your organization. It will help you and maintain compliance with regional regulations that restrict collection of certain data types. And of course, it will help reduce CPU and memory consumption from the signal collections on your endpoint devices. You can see on your right, so this collection policies right now is in preview. You can find it under classifiers, information protection. So I'll swiftly walk you through the configuration. So from the new collection policies workflow, admins can define the classifiers that are relevant to their organization. So alternatively, admins can exclude classifiers that may be irrelevant to their needs. For instance, the let's say the all medical terms and conditions SIT, which is available out of the box, may not be relevant to an organization, right? So hence they would not be interested in capturing matches for this particular SIT in their logs or activity explorer or alerts. So there can be multiple such classifiers. So it would make sense for them to filter them out, which can be done using collection policy. Similarly, admins can also define the types of user activities they would like to detect from each data source. Like on in the image here, we have for the devices data as the connected data source, there are currently around 19 user activities which you can choose from. Then the data sources that you can choose from are your connected data sources, which cover your devices, Copilot experiences, your managed enterprise AI apps. Then there are unmanaged cloud apps, which pulls up the MDCA or the Microsoft Defender Cloud Apps app catalog, which are all the cloud apps that have been onboarded to MDCA, right? So using collection policy, you can do all this. You can also scope the policy to all the specific users or user groups. Now, going further, you can also choose whether to only detect AI interactions that match your conditions, which you defined earlier, or capture the AI prompts and responses as well. So you can choose either of this. Now, this, as I showed, collection policies can be created from information protection. Alternatively, you can also leverage the one-click approach to create a collection policy from DSPM. Right? Just to quickly summarize this, the collection policy basically makes your data collection more customizable, right, for the organization. So, and enforcement will happen on top of this data collected by the collection policy by integrating this with DLP, which will be the logical next step that we'll follow. So right now, collection policy for devices is already in preview, and the documentation is also updated, so you can check it out for more details there. Now moving to the Purview data security controls for browser and network in particular. So given how rapidly and extensively generative AI tools are being used at workplace, it is only logical for a data security solution to holistically cover browser and network scenarios, right? And Purview is extending its data security capabilities to the network layer. And we are also enhancing our browser-based capabilities for Microsoft Edge for Business. Just mentioning a few here, like we have inline protection controls for web apps and AI apps in Edge for Business. This new feature applies directly in the Edge browser for users on managed devices. So talking about the value this feature brings, so business data is sent to unmanaged AI apps by users. It can be purposeful or it can be accidental, but it can potentially lead to a data security incident. So more visibility into the prompts will allow admins to better target these exfiltrations. Now, for the purpose of discovery of sensitive content typed in prompts, we have the collection policy as we discussed before. And to enforce block on this, DLP policy can be leveraged. Now, we are starting with some of the top consumer Gen AI apps, which are your ChatGPT, Google Gemini, DeepSeek, Copilot for Bing. So admins will be able to block typed prompts containing sensitive data on these apps. Now, this list will continuously expand to support broad range of unmanaged apps, including your additional Gen AI apps, your email collaboration, the social media apps, right? So the list will expand. Now, just to highlight here, as part of the setup, there's an additionally required configuration in order to block users from accessing these apps from non-compliant browsers, right? So this feature is for Edge for Business. If you want to block users from accessing from non-compliant browsers, what can be done is the admin using the edge management service in the admin portal can configure the settings there, and this will ensure that these apps can be accessed by users only in the edge protected browser where the policies actually apply. Also, to emphasize, this inline protection complements what we already have in our endpoint DLP controls in form of monitoring upload of sensitive data to cloud or pasting sensitive data in the browser, etc. Right? But since inline protection is built natively into Edge for Business, so these newly deployed policies will automatically take effect in the browser, even if endpoint DLP is not deployed to the device. So this is the advantage this feature brings. Moving on, we have inline data protection in Edge for Business for unmanaged Windows and macOS devices. So on previous slide, we saw managed device and unmanaged cloud app scenario. Now let me touch upon the unmanaged device and managed app scenario, right? It's the other way around. So with Edge for Business, organizations can now apply DLP policies directly within the browser when users are signed using their work profile. So specifically, Purview DLP would allow admins to configure policies that monitor and protect data in real time, right, on unmanaged or their personal devices by targeting activities within the organization managed cloud apps. That is the apps that use Microsoft Entra ID for authentication. Now, these policies help prevent users from intentionally or unintentionally sharing or exfiltrating sensitive data from corporate apps while using their either personal device or any unmanaged endpoint. Now, this feature is especially valuable for organizations that heavily rely on contractors or frontline workers, or organizations that have BYOD or bring your own device policies in place, or maybe the organizations which need to extend protection beyond the traditional MDM managed devices, right? So just to highlight a scenario here, like internal users or contractors were navigating to a managed app such as Workday from Edge for Business by logging in with Entra ID account. For this, we can have appropriate DLP controls applied. Let's say you want to block download of sensitive financial data for them while allowing the download of general purpose documents which are not sensitive, right? So these controls can be done using this. Moving on to the network protection. So we have inline discovery of sensitive data shared over network. So what it essentially means is we are extending Purview protection to the network layer by integrating Purview with your existing secure access service edge or SASE solution. Now, through this integration, admins can intercept and inspect traffic flow through the network layer to identify the presence of any sensitive data. And as a natural next step, we would come up with the capability to enforce DLP policies on top of it, right? But right now it's for the discovery part. Now, as we start this journey, we have Netscope, iBoss, and Palo Alto Networks as the SASE providers, where we would be integrating with. So Netscope and iBoss integration that will be in preview in the coming months, and Palo Alto SASE solution would be available later this year. And the list of the supported SASE partners will continue to expand as we move ahead, right? Now, once the integration is established with the SASE solution and the network collection policies created with Purview, any sensitive content that is shared within managed or unmanaged browsers, apps, add-ins, etc., matching the policy will be visible in Purview's Activity Explorer. So this sharing can happen by mistake or it may be intentional, but whatever be the case, capturing it is important because you can only easily protect what you know, right? Just to highlight certain scenarios, let's say your employee without noticing shares sensitive compensation data or let's say business metric data in public forms, or say your sales team that frequently collaborates with external distributors uploads data like sales pitch on cloud platforms like their personal box, it can be their personal Dropbox. Organizations need to be aware of all this in order to have a full control over the flow of sensitive data. So this discovery part of sensitive content being shared out network, which the admin can now see at a single place, is what's coming up with this feature. I hope that was clear. Moving on, we have security copilot skills that are available in Purview. So you can leverage security copilot to get insights into your existing DLP policies. You can see security copilot's magic in Activity Explorer and on the alerts page as well. So you can gain, starting with the DLP policy insights. So for the policies, Copilot for security in DLP can summarize the specific policies or all policies for you. So this enhancement basically enables the DLP admins to gain insights on the coverage of policies, such as what locations they apply to, what sensitive information or classifier they use, how the admins are notified about violations, how the users are educated with policy tips, all those things that you configure within your policy, you can actually get those insights using Copilot now. Now, all the DLP admin has to do is select the policy or policies on the policy page in DLP and just click on the Get Insights with Copilot button. You can then easily leverage Copilot to access the information using the suggestive prompts or put in your own prompt. And the basic aim here is to provide clear and concise information about the policy posture with minimal clicks and latency. Because going into every policy configuration on the portal is a tedious task, and it may not be an ideal way to check the policy posture if it is to be done on a regular basis, right? So with this embedded security copilot experience, this process now becomes much smoother and quick. Then security copilot and activity explorer, what you can leverage Copilot to drill down into the activity data and collect insights from it to investigate into the security incidents. For example, you can prompt to get the top 5 activities that were there in the past week, or let's say get all the files that were copied to cloud. Or you can be even more specific, like files that were copied to cloud with sensitive info type as credit card for the past 30 days. So all such prompts you can give and you can get the insights from the events in the Activity Explorer. And similar thing you can do with alerts, right? You can ask Copilot to summarize the alert for you. You can prompt to get the specific details like the DLP policy that matched, what file activity happened on what sensitive data that actually triggered the alert, and so on. Moving on, we have the administrative unit or admin unit support for SharePoint. So admin unit support has been there for long now. You must be aware of its utility, but just a brief for the larger audience about what AUs are meant for. Now, so firstly, admin units are created in Microsoft Entra. Now, what they allow an organization to do is create boundaries that make sense for their scenario, like for the purpose of restricting visibility and management control. So with these admin units, you can restrict the application of the policy to a specific set of users or user groups, which can be based on your geographical units or different departments within an organization and similar scenarios. So it's certainly highly relevant for compliance reasons like GDPR. Now we have had admin union support for other workloads like Exchange, Teams, OneDrive, and devices. You would have tried that already, but now it has been expanded to cover SharePoint as well. So we can have specific SharePoint sites scoped to an admin unit. So the admins of that admin unit can create or edit policies scoped to that admin unit. Only they can view the events in the Activity Explorer, and only they will be able to triage alerts for sites scoped to that admin unit, right? For instance, this feature would enable DLP alerts originating from a highly confidential site for the finance team to only be investigated by a specific group of incident handlers who are defined as admins of this admin unit to which this particular site is scoped to. So this is the capability that this feature has. Moving on, similar feature like a feature for SharePoint, we have the just-in-time or JIT protection for SharePoint now. So JIT protection for SharePoint will allow organizations to extend protection to the unclassified files in SharePoint and apply restrictions defined in DLP policies at the time of egress. Now we already support JIT on Endpoint, and it's now being extended to cover files on SharePoint as well. Just quickly going through what files JIT actually covers. So JIT covers files that have never been evaluated, right? So without JIT feature, old files will not be blocked when the files are egressed the first time. This is because they are not classified yet, so they are not within the scope of the policy right now. So also items on which the evaluation has gone stale will also be covered by JIT. So these are basically the previously evaluated files that haven't been reevaluated by the current and updated cloud version of the policy. Basically, JIT would extend protection to these files in SharePoint that have not yet been interacted with from the time the policy was activated. So this will be coming soon. Next, we have decoupling of policy tips and email notifications while configuring DLP rules for SharePoint and OneDrive. So this capability already exists for other workloads, but not for SharePoint and OneDrive. For SharePoint and OneDrive, so far, whenever the admin would want to enable email notifications, the policy tips also need to be enabled and vice versa, right? But with this decoupling, admin can now configure the settings separately. So you can basically have four kind of configurations possible. You can have none of policy tips or email notifications selected. You can have only policy tips, or you can configure only email notifications, and then you can configure both as well. Now you can see in the snippet that's there on the screen, it's from the Exchange DLP configuration. So this is how the decoupling actually looks like. So it will be expanded to SharePoint and OneDrive workloads as well. Moving on, we have DLP to extend restrictions on M365 Copilot processing content with sensitivity labels, right? So what's native to M365 Copilot is that it enforces access control on the user, which means if the user doesn't have permission to access a file, the Copilot will not process that file's content in its response, right? Now with DLP for M365 Copilot, it will provide an additional security layer on top of this. Now this feature will actually allow DLP policies to provide detection of sensitivity labels in the enterprise grounding data, and then go ahead and restrict access of content in M365 Copilot. Just for example, let's say you configure a DLP policy to restrict processing of content labeled as personal because you don't want M365 Copilot summaries to have your personal content in it because you intend to share the summary with the larger org. So you can achieve this with this feature. Also, a quick mention here, this feature would also be covering emails with sensitivity labels as well. So for emails dated January 1, 2025 and later, admins can configure a DLP policy to restrict M365 Copilot from processing content of emails as well that are labeled with specific label that you define with the condition as you can see on the screen. There's a content contains predicate and you can choose the sensitivity label that you want to configure. So M365 Copilot is added as a location option along with the existing ones that we have, as you can see in the image. So configuring the policy is pretty intuitive this way for M365 Copilot. Moving ahead, we have the ability to rename the policy and rule names coming up in DLP. Currently, customers don't have a way to edit the name of the DLP policy or rule once it's created. The only way to achieve this is to delete the policy and create the entire policy again with the new name. But even then, there's an issue that the history of the alerts will still show only the old name and there would be no linkage to the new policy name. So this feature actually solves that. It gives the ability to the DLP admin to rename the existing policy or rule without having to create the entire policy or rule again. So without disrupting existing policies at all, you can achieve this while preserving the linkage to all your historical data that concerning the policies you want to rename, right? So this linkage to the historical data will be maintained. Renaming the policy will not make you lose that. So this is a convenient term and a much faster experience now. Moving on. So enriching the details of the auto forwarded emails in Exchange DLP. So this is an enhancement to our solution that will provide more accurate and detailed information for auto forwarded emails. This new feature will ensure that the correct sender, recipient information and email evidence are displayed in the alerts that are generated. So it will basically help admins accurately trace the origin and the intended recipient of the forwarded emails, thereby reducing confusion and minimizing the risk of any false positives. So the update will be reflected in the audit logs, in the alerts, and also in the Activity Explorer events. For auto forwarded emails, alert and event in Activity Explorer would earlier show the sender and the original recipient details, but no information about the receiver of the auto forwarded email, right? So this was a gap. Now, when auto forward goes to an external user, DLP policy is triggered for the condition that content is shared with people outside the org, right? But still, the alert and the Activity Explorer event would show recipient as the internal user, which actually misleads admins. So this is improved now to display the recipient of the forwarded email. So I'll just use an example here to further clarify this. So let's say the policy is that when subject or body of email contains the word confidential and it is shared with people outside the org, you restrict access, right? So now if internal user A sends a mail having confidential word to internal user B, who has then set auto forward to external user C, policy will trigger for the case when the mail is auto forwarded to C, who is the external user, right? So the expected behavior here would be for the event and the alert to show email address of internal user B as the sender now, and the email address of the external user C as the recipient. So this is what this feature brings now. I hope the example was clear. Moving further, the DLP policy tips and oversharing. So as you would be aware, policy tips aim to alert and notify the users when their email contains sensitive information that violates organizational policies. Now, policy tip support is being extended to cover Outlook for Mac and mobile devices, covering both Android and iOS. Also, there's an enhancement coming up wherein the policy tip shall wait for the recipient to be added. So, policy tip will wait until all the recipients are fully resolved by the active DLP policies, right? So, this will provide an improved user experience and minimize disruption by showing warning only after the recipient condition is met. So, just I'll use an example again here. For instance, consider there are two conditions with AND operator. So one is that label of email is highly confidential, and the other is that recipient domain is Gmail. So when a user starts a new email draft and sets the label as highly confidential, so far the first condition is met, right? The policy tip should not appear at this point because still, so it should actually wait for the recipient details to be input. So this behavior is what this feature brings now. Moving ahead, we have a new predicate in the Exchange DLP, which is detect number of domains and recipients. So this feature is designed to address a critical need for managing and controlling the distribution of sensitive content via email. So it will allow organizations to set specific policies that would trigger alert when the number of unique recipients or domains in the outgoing emails exceeds a defined threshold. Just a quick example, let's say an organization, maybe consulting organization, would want to block its employee working on two different client projects to send an email address to both, right? Because that would be a breach of trust and privacy. So this can be achieved by setting the number of recipient domain count greater than one in the policy predicate. So this capability comes with this feature. Then we have sensitivity label filter for DLP alerts. So admins can now drill down into DLP alerts associated with specific sensitivity labels, such as highly confidential or internal only, to streamline their investigation when using alerts and incident queues on the Defender portal. So there are a bunch of filters already available. With label as a new filter, DLP violations can be sorted based on specific labels applied to files or emails. And in this way, the investigation can be kept more focused. Lastly, for today, we have the save and reuse filters in Activity Explorer. So this capability is already generally available now on your tenants. With this, admins will be able to create filter sets with already selected filters and then apply them quickly at a later point of time. So this is so you can have custom filters, create custom filters. You also have, you also have built-in filters you can choose from. So with this, admins will not have to apply the same filters again and again on their every visit to the Activity Explorer. Additionally, these state filters are available for all admins in the tenant, right? So it will make it simpler for admins to collaborate amongst themselves by sharing these state filters. This would help them make investigations more standardized across the team members. Overall, it makes it easier and faster for admins to investigate. Like just for instance, for an admin who is interested in viewing only the file upload to cloud events for endpoint workload, the right filters would be the one that are shown in the image on the screen. So this can be saved for quick reuse, and similar other custom filters can be created and saved for different investigation use cases. All right, so those were some of the features in DLP solution within Purview I wanted to highlight. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thanks so much, Ravish. And we just have a few questions that were unanswered in the Q&A chat that we can go over quickly. The first one says, is it possible to block non-hybrid Entra ID devices from downloading unlabeled files? Defender for Cloud Apps doesn't appear to have a session policy that affects unlabeled data when allowing some labeled data. Are there any options other than blocking all downloads? Asked this question in the MIP webinar yesterday, and they said it's a DLP issue.
Right. So on the DLP side, so I understand it's not there on the Defender for Cloud Apps. It's not covered there. On DLP also, I believe it's not there today. So yeah, that I don't think this capability exists as of today.
Okay, sounds good. And the next question says, inline discovery of sensitive data shared over network. Is this available for Zscaler?
Right. So as I mentioned, like initially we have Netscope and IBOS, and Palo Alto will be coming later this year. So those are the SASE providers we covered so far. About Zscaler, yeah. So right now I cannot comment on that if there are plans or not. But yes, so that would be my answer to this.
Great. And then the next question says, I have a question regarding Endpoint DLP settings. Access apps that aren't unallowed application list. Does this mean it will monitor all applications?
Okay. Can you please repeat this again?
Yes. I have a question regarding Endpoint DLP settings. Access apps that aren't unallowed application list. Does this mean it will monitor all applications?
Yeah, so you can configure the like restricted apps or app groups that are there. You can configure that in the endpoint DLP settings, and the ones that you have configured there, you can you can then actually use them within your DLP policy when you actually configure the rule. So there's an option there to leverage those restricted apps and app groups, the app groups specifically that you have created. While the restricted apps that you define, only those would be restricted, while the others would be allowed. Yes.
Great. And then the last question we can go over says, are there DLP best practice policies?
DLP best practice policies. Okay, so that's a very broad question, to be honest. Yes, we have some scenarios documented, so those would be available on our public documentation. Yeah, I'm not sure if we have shared on the chat, but yes, they are there, so you can go through those. But yes, otherwise, like it depends on the organization as well. What are their use cases, and only after going through the use cases we can actually come up with what is the best way to use DLP policies. It cannot be commented in general.
Perfect. Sounds good. And it looks like that link was shared in the chat. So hopefully those are good resources for everybody. Perfect. Well, it looks like those were all of the questions. So all the questions have been answered either verbally or in the chat. So thank you, Ravish, for being our guest and for sharing the great information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team who helped us with answering the questions and providing the resourceful information. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/securitycommunity. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. Also, please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product-related questions, please feel free to raise them on our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/Azure Purview Community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.